Welcome to NCCI's Insights Video Edition. Two recent reports in our Insights portal address key legislative updates in the workers' compensation industry. NCCI Executive Director of Regulatory and Legislative Analysis, Laura Kersey, joins us to discuss NCCI's Focus on 3, which addresses independent contractors and the gig economy, single-payer health insurance, and the legalization of marijuana. She'll also cover 5 things you need to know about COVID-19 workers' compensation presumptions.
In this mid-year update, we cover legislative developments for 3 topics of interest: independent contractors in the gig economy, single-payer health insurance, and marijuana legalization. The report highlights state legislative developments for each of these topics, and it also dives a little deeper and discusses why these topics are of interest to workers' comp stakeholders.
The updates on the gig economy and independent contractors has a lot of focus on efforts to define what classifies an individual as an employee or independent contractor. Can you talk more about that and what it means for workers' compensation?
That's right. There's been a lot of debate over whether a gig worker, think Uber drivers or DoorDash workers, should be considered an employee of the app-based company or should be considered an independent contractor. Several states proposed legislation this year, and 3 states enacted legislation that specifically addresses certain gig workers. A couple of other states proposed legislation that would create a legal test to determine whether any worker, not just gig workers, are employees or independent contractors. And these tests consider factors like how much direction and control the employer has over the work. Rhode Island and Vermont are examples of states that considered this type of legislation this year. In addition to the legislative developments, the report also covers why it matters how a worker is designated and whether they're part of the workers' compensation system. For example, a worker who's classified as an employee may be able to utilize return-to-work programs and get back to work sooner and safer.
Another topic the report covers is the latest on single-payer health insurance proposals. What's some of the latest legislative news there?
This year, 4 states considered legislation that would create a single-payer health insurance program in the state, and also directed the new programs board to basically look into the feasibility of including workers' compensation in that new program. And the 4 states that consider legislation are California, Kansas, Rhode Island, and New York. But so far this year, none of the states that we're monitoring have passed this type of legislation. But as the article notes, these proposals raise several questions for workers' compensation stakeholders. For example, what happens to the comp system if the state decides to incorporate the medical portion of workers' comp into a state single-payer healthcare program? How could this impact the benefit delivery system and overall medical care for injured workers?
And Laura, the Focus on 3 provides legislative updates on medical marijuana. Currently at the federal level, marijuana is illegal. Any state-level news and potential workers' compensation related updates there?
Yes, the states continue to be active on this issue. Rhode Island recently enacted legislation to legalize the recreational use of marijuana, and Mississippi passed a law earlier this year that legalized medical marijuana. And as you can see in the report, several other states considered or are still considering legalizing either medical or recreational marijuana. States also continue to debate the issue of reimbursement for medical marijuana and workers' compensation. 3 states passed legislation this year stating that workers' comp insurers are not required to reimburse. 2 of those states were 2 that I mentioned earlier, Rhode Island and Mississippi. They addressed this issue when they enacted their respective legalization bills. And the other state was South Dakota. On the other hand, 2 other states, New Jersey and New York, have pending legislation that would require workers' comp coverage for medical marijuana under certain circumstances. Now, as you can see in the article, there's still a lot of outstanding questions when it comes to marijuana legalization and workers' comp. There are questions about drug testing and maintaining drug-free workplaces. As the states continue to debate these issues, as you noted, marijuana continues to be illegal at the federal level.
And moving to updates on COVID-19 workers' compensation presumptions. 2 years after the start of the pandemic, COVID-19 is still an important topic for workers' compensation, and that includes legislation related to workers' compensation presumptions. Laura, how many states have established COVID-19 workers' compensation presumptions?
Since the start of the pandemic, 18 states have established COVID-19 presumptions through various mechanisms, including legislation, executive orders, and emergency rules. And 2 additional states established a broader infectious disease presumption through legislation. It's important to note that most of these presumptions contain expiration dates that were tied to the end of the state of emergency or another specified date. But as the report highlights, some of the state COVID-19 presumptions are still in effect today.
Are any of these states considering legislation to extend their presumptions and/or expand the presumptions to additional types of workers?
Yes, we did see several states consider legislation to extend or expand their presumptions. 2 states passed legislation this year to extend their presumptions to a later date. Virginia extended a presumption for certain healthcare providers, and Minnesota extended a presumption to January of 2023 with certain caveats and under certain circumstances. California has pending legislation to extend their presumption to January of 2025. Now, there are other states, including Florida, Maryland, and Rhode Island, that considered legislation to establish new COVID-19 presumptions in those states. But so far, none of those bills have passed.
What are some additional updates related to this topic you can share with us?
Well, a key question about COVID-19 presumptions is whether they're temporary in nature. As I mentioned earlier, 2 states enacted broader infectious disease presumptions over the past couple of years. Those states are Tennessee and Washington. And 5 additional states proposed this type of legislation this year. Now, these proposals may or may not specifically mention COVID-19, but they contain terms like infectious or contagious disease, or they may reference a future pandemic. These presumptions generally don't contain an expiration date or a sunset provision, so they may be applicable or remain in effect beyond the COVID-19 pandemic.
Visit the NCCI Insights portal to find both articles Laura just discussed, in addition to more valuable workers' compensation content. Follow us on Twitter at NCCI and hit the subscribe button and notification icon here on Channel NCCI so you never miss an update. I'm Sheila Fortson. Join us next time when we discuss the issues at the top of the workers' comp agenda from the source you trust.